Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hi, and welcome to Inside Specialization, the newest feature of the ATA podcast on specialization and diversification. My name is Charo Welle, and I am Deputy Chair of ATA's Professional Development Committee. It is great to have this new series as a special collaboration between the ATA podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. In this episode, I have the pleasure to interview Marina Ilari, the current administrator of the ATA Translation Company Division, to talk about video game localization, a very specialized field in which Marina is highly experienced and recognized. Marina is an ATA certified English into Spanish translator with over 15 years of experience in the translation profession. She has worked as a translator, editor, and quality assurance specialist for many companies around the world, with a special focus on creative translations and video game localization. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Terra Translations and co-host of the podcast about translation, En Pantuflas. If you have met Marina, then you have experienced her warmth and know that for her, professional translation and volunteer leadership is all about having fun. Marina, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So now our first question. Could you tell our listeners what led you to choose a career in video game localization?
Yeah, it's one of those cases where the specialization found me. When I first started out as a translator, I was working in many different fields, mainly technology, IT. But one day I applied for a position to be part of a video game localization project. I didn't have any previous experience in video game localization, but I loved creative translations. I majored in literary translation at university, and I also loved video games. So it was very exciting and very intriguing for me at the time. I was selected to take part in this localization project. It was for a large AAA game. And it was that project that led me to find my niche in video game localization. Since then, I have helped localize hundreds of games, and I love it.
And the rest is history. Very interesting. So briefly, could you give us a run of what a basic video localization process looks like from the moment you receive the assignment to its delivery?
Yes. So the localization project, first I will tell you a little bit on the game developers side and the publisher side. So there are several steps there that are usually taken before they decide to translate a game. So it starts with the globalization, and then they work on the internationalization. Just then comes the localization itself. And after that, we also have a linguistic quality assurance step and also a testing step of the game. So there are many different processes involved from the game developer side. Now, from the perspective of the translator, we usually have to work on the localization phase, or sometimes on the LQA, the linguistic quality assurance. And as a game localizer, you usually have certain project assets. So aside of the translatable text itself. So for example, you will have ideally a style guide and a glossary and a translation memory and a query sheet where you can ask questions. And of course, any reference materials, including sometimes the actual game. So from the moment you receive a project until you deliver it, you have to make use of all these different assets to help you with your work.
Oh, that's very interesting and very involved process. So with that, in your recent ATA webinar, Transcreation-in-Video Localization, that you co-host with Lucio Alcaide, you explained that as a part of the quality assurance processes, companies use gamers to test the localized video game. So can you tell us more about the process of testing the games?
Yeah, gaming companies would usually hire testers directly to test their game. And this is post-localization and post-linguistic quality assurance. So the testers, what they do is they play the game and they identify and report any possible bugs within the game. So sometimes these have to do with linguistic things, but usually, because there is a linguistic quality control, usually they don't have to do with linguistic things. There could be issues with the gameplay, a design feature that is not working, a text that is cut off, those sorts of problems. And yeah, in general, it's not the translator that works on the testing. It's usually done by a testing company or a hired tester. There are companies that specialize in this, and they would be the ones involved in this stage. Sometimes when we get feedback, especially if it's an ongoing game, we might get feedback from the testers or something they want changed, in which case we have to go and maybe update the glossary and update the translation memory so that we can reflect any changes that they want for future reference, right? And that's super useful. Sometimes we don't get any feedback from the testing phase, which is a shame because, you can always learn and improve. And it's always useful to receive any kind of feedback, I think.
Okay, very good. So the obvious question, does a translator need to be a habitual gamer to specialize in video game localization?
It's the $1 million question, Charo. I think it's very useful to have an interest or an affinity for games. Perhaps you're not an active gamer right now, but you were in the past. It's important to understand the games and play them or have played them at some point in your life, because you need to understand the mechanics of the game and be able to see the game from the gamer's perspective. Because in video game, it's all about the gamer comes first. You have to bear in mind that the purpose of your translation is entertainment and it's resonating with the players of the game. And if you're a gamer, you can put yourself in the player's shoes and see the game from their perspective.
Oh, that's excellent. So as it pertains to the United States copyright and intellectual property laws and video games, could you tell us two specific contractual provisions or conditions that video game localization companies require of translators?
So the gaming industry is very secretive in general. They don't want any information getting leaked because it could cost them a lot of money. So when you work in video game localization, you will have to sign some pretty strict non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. In most cases, you're not allowed to mention the games you have worked on, at least until they're published, but sometimes even after that, or use the company's logos or anything like that. So also big gaming projects would have a nickname or like a secret code to refer to the game, to refer to the project, so as not to name the actual name of the game. So it's all handled, with a lot of strict confidentiality.
Oh, wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes. Considering that many video games, when first launched, do not become an immediate success, but are rather short-lived, how such scenario affect the ability of a video game translator to market themselves?
Yeah, the decision to pursue a market or not is done really by the developers or the publishers of the game. The translator could give maybe a recommendation, but ultimately they have no say in that. If the game ends up being successful in a certain market or not, will not depend on the localization only. I mean, it can help, but it's not only that. There are many different factors, such as the gameplay itself, the marketing strategies in the market surrounding the game. So I think as a translator, any projects you work on is valuable. You will probably learn a lot from each game you work on, and it adds to your portfolio. So when you're working on with a potential client, you can mention certain information about the games that you've worked on. Perhaps you don't say the names, but you could allude to them. Or for example, you could say, I worked on an adventure role-playing game that had 150,000 words. And all these details can help you in showing your potential client your expertise, I think.
Very good. So how can a translator seeking to tap in this market find clients?
Well, the easiest way into the industry is working with translation companies that specialize in video game localization. There are several out there that you can apply to, and they will probably send you a translation test. I would say to take that opportunity to practice and to use any feedback that you're given to improve your skills. There are also some in-house opportunities to work either on the translation company side or on the client side. Many big gaming companies have a localization department and hire translators for the localization or the LQA of the game, the linguistic quality control. There are also some really cool communities online to connect with indie game developers, for example. And there are Facebook groups and there are groups via Discord. And that's a great way to, get your foot in the door and connect with those communities. And there are also some great initiatives such as the Game Localization Jam, the Lock Jam. This event used to be organized every year. Then it was discontinued, but this year is back. And it's basically a project of translating a game. And you can submit your translation, and then there's a group of judges that would evaluate it and choose a winner. And again, I think it's another way of, getting practice and also getting visibility.
Excellent. So what has been your more fulfilling video game localization project?
Oh, it's hard to choose. I've worked on so many game localization projects. There is one game in particular that I'm proud of. It was a mobile game with rhymes, and it was very challenging to adapt the rhyme to Spanish. A lot of transcreation skills were necessary. But yeah, I'm very proud of how it turned out. And I think also all the projects where you feel you're appreciated and you're listened to as a translator are fulfilling to me. When the clients listen to your suggestions and they answer your questions promptly, and they overall appreciate your hard work.
That is fabulous. That's great. And what is one specific challenge every translator in video game localization should be prepared to face?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the biggest challenge would be context, the absence of context, more specifically. We might find incomplete dialogues. So the rest of the dialogue might be assigned to another localizer in the team, or it's not written yet. Or sometimes we just have part of the speaker's dialogues, not in sequence. So you kind of have to fill in the gaps to the best of your ability, and usually with consulting with the client, right? Even if the dialogues are complete and are in order, we have to question everything, especially with regards to gender, to number concordance. So it's convenient to create a mental image of how the dialogue is developed and who intervenes in the scene in order to get all those concordances right. When translating dialogues, you have to constantly check which character is talking, who are they talking to? Are they talking to just one person or more than one person? And when you don't have this information, you cannot assume, you have to ask.
That makes a lot of sense. But during this interview, you explained that translators, in a certain way, do have to like, or at least know video games to specialize in video game localization, right? So in such case, what are two specific skills any seasoned or aspiring video game translator should have or develop to succeed in this segment of the TI industry, keeping in mind that the end user is what you should have to think about? So
yeah, I would say first, you have to get along with technology in general, because the client will usually require you to use a translation tool or even work in a platform. So you can't be afraid of technology, so to say. You have to be comfortable translating a variety of different texts, because you might be translating, say, a game manual one day, or dialogue, something more creative, perhaps something more technical the next day. But yeah, creativity is great for this field. So if you like copywriting, if you like literary translation, subtitling, those are specializations that can be similar in nature to some games. And then being resourceful really helps, because you have to do a lot of research and ask questions. And yeah, when in doubt, you always have to ask, get into the forums, see what's being said. Don't rely on what you already know, but always investigate a little more. Yeah. And then finally, I would say probably if you like challenges, because each game, it's its own world, its own unique challenges. When you finish translating a game, which you've most likely become an expert in, suddenly, you start working on a completely different game, and you have to investigate everything again, basically start from zero, not zero, but pretty much, you're delving into a new world. So you have to like challenges, I would say.
That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. And our last question, with that, what special advice would you give a translator in video game localization who wishes to remain competitive during this fast-paced digital age?
My advice would be to continue to be at the forefront of what's happening, both in the translation profession, but also in the gaming industry. So nowadays we have so many alternatives online. We can take e-learning courses, webinars. So I would say to specialize in it as much as you can. It's an industry that is constantly evolving. So it's important to be at the forefront of what's happening with processes, with technology, especially. And then video game localization is very broad. Each game genre has its own unique characteristics. And the more you know about each type of game, the better. Sometimes gaming companies or specialized translation companies will ask you what type of games you play or you're specialized into. So you could be, for example, a great translator for a shooter game, but not so much for a sports game. So the more you know about each type of game genre, ideally specializing in some game genre, will help you in getting that competitive advantage.
Marina, we appreciate your time and generosity in sharing with us about video game localization. I'm sure that our listeners will find your advice and insights enriching and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.